Good morning. Let's get started. We've got a great day ahead of us. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Brett Carnell. I'm the head of technical services in the Prints and Photographs division here at the library. I'm welcoming you on behalf of Helena Zinkum, who unexpectedly couldn't be here today. She's the director of our special collections, but she sends her regrets. So it's an honor to bring together today so many people interested in the work of internationally renowned architect Paul Rudolph, and to mark the centennial of his birth in October 23rd, 1918. Let me set the stage for today's talks by telling you a bit about the Library of Congress, which is also the National Library of the United States, America's library. Architecture had a strong influence on our heritage and our collecting. Founded in 1800, the Library of Congress is the oldest federal cultural institution in the United States. We began with quarters in the Capitol just across the way, and the British burned us down in 1814. So to rebuild, Congress approved the purchase of Thomas Jefferson's private library, and we trace our special architectural interests to that connection. Today, we are the largest library in the world. We have more than 167 million items that include books, magazines, databases, manuscripts, maps, movies, newspapers, and more than 1 million photographs and drawings that focus on the built environment. Over the past century, through the concerted efforts of curators in the Prints and Photographs division, the architectural design and engineering collections have expanded and flourished. We have gathered documentation for vernacular buildings, as well as for the landscape and landmarks created by famous men and women. We offer a fantastic array of unique materials from Latrobe, Robert Fulton, Richard Morris Hunt, and Frederick Law Olmsted, to Cass Gilbert, Frank Lloyd Wright, Charles and Ray Eames, I.M. Pei, Victor Lundy, and hundreds of other architects, including, of course, Paul Rudolph. Why would the Library of Congress have the Paul Rudolph Archive here? A primary mission of the Library of Congress is to develop qualitatively its universal collections, which document the history and further the creativity of the American people, and which record and contribute to the advancement of civilization and knowledge throughout the world. Preserving, organizing, and providing access to the Paul Rudolph's Archive fits this mission well in many ways. A major figure in American architecture during the second half of the 20th century, Rudolph's work as a dedicated modernist embodied his innovative considerations of function, materials, space, light, monumentality, urbanism, and modular construction. An influential form giver, Rudolph constantly explored new uses of and approaches to materials and construction technology, including wood, brick, steel, and concrete, in many ways redefining post-World War II architecture in America and later in Asia. The tens of thousands of highly original design drawings in Rudolph's archive were created by one of the premier draftsmen in the history of architecture and elegantly represent both his ideas and his process. The Library of Congress also shares with Paul Rudolph a strong belief in education. To encourage the use of original design drawings and photographs, we have already digitized and made available online more than 500,000 architectural images for anyone to access 24/7 worldwide. In fact, the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering was established in the Library of Congress in 2002 through a bequest of Paul Rudolph. The purpose of the center is to focus attention on, encourage support for, and promote the study of the library's unmatched architecture, design, and engineering collections, thereby increasing the public's awareness and appreciation of the achievements of the architecture, design, and engineering professions and their contributions to our quality of life. Please join me in thanking the Paul Rudolph Foundation for its co-sponsorship of today's symposium. I'd also like to give special recognition to Fort Petrus, the founding director of the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering, and to Mari Nakahara, the library's current curator of architecture, design, and engineering, and a moving force in bringing this symposium to us. Sean?
Good morning. It's so great to be here with you this morning. On behalf of Ian Gilchrist, George Bali, Dan Weber, and myself, Sean Corsandi, I'd like to welcome you to our symposium, Ushering in the Next Century of Paul Rudolph. I'll be your MC today. By day, I'm the Executive Director of Landmark West, a good government NGO, preservation and land use focused group on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I came into Paul Rudolph after an extensive deep dive into the archives of Eero Saarinen while in grad school and have been in the foundation for over a decade. We have so much talent in the room today, and I can't wait to introduce you to everyone. Our first segment is going to kick off with the Library of Congress. You'll hear from Ford Petrus, the founding director of the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering at the Library of Congress, as well as Tim Rowan, academic, author, and one-time Library of Congress Klug Fellow. In turn, they will discuss the acquisition, preservation, organization, access, and use of the Rudolph Collection. To begin with Ford. As the founding director of the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering at the Library of Congress, Ford was the curator of those collections for over 40 years. He was also responsible for more than 400 acquisitions, totaling over 3 million items. These include the archives and rare book and photograph collections of the AIA and United Engineering Societies, and the archives of architects such as Richard Morris Hunt, Cass Gilbert, Victor Lundy, I.M. Pei, and Paul Rudolph. Designers, Raymond Loewy, Charles and Ray Eames, and photographers, Sigrid Fischer, Samuel Gotchko, John Margulies, and Barthazar Korab, among others. Ford is widely published and is the recipient of numerous awards. He has been instrumental in the organization of major exhibitions on the United States Capitol, on the work of Charles and Ray Eames, and Frank Lloyd Wright. As a graduate student, Ford was introduced to Paul Rudolph, who became a good friend and took an early interest in his career. In the 90s, Paul began to plan the transfer of his own professional archive to the library, where he also helped establish the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering in order to bring greater attention and support to the library's rich collections in those subject areas, thus making them more useful to the widest possible audience. Please welcome Ford Petrus.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean and George and Ian and the foundation. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out this morning and welcome. A special thanks is owed to the Rudolph Foundation, the impetus for this centenary symposium and celebration of the life and work of Paul Rudolph. It is especially appropriate that a major goal is to attract support to digitize and make more widely available the items in Rudolph's vast archive in the Library of Congress. And contributions are welcome to the foundation. My presentation this morning is intended to let you know more about how Rudolph's archive came to be in the Library of Congress, its scope and contents, housing and preservation, and current use. It is also a personal story that began when I first met Paul Rudolph in the early 1970s on a visit to his then not-so-big Beekman Place apartment in the former townhouse of the actor Katharine Cornell. I was with a small group of fellow graduate students from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Our professor, Marvin Saltzman, an artist who had known Paul for a number of years, rightly judged that a visit with a leading American architect would be appropriate for a New York field trip for students of American art. We all had a grand time having drinks while looking out over the East River from a vertiginous perch. The image on the screen now is that early version of the apartment, except we were there at night, so all those mirrors were sparkling, and that mural wasn't over the white Victorian fireplace, which he preserved. We sat on a platform of white carpet through which holes had been cut to accommodate the legs of Paul's grand piano. Our view was through a wall of glass twinkling with a curtain made from hundreds of small round mirrors, which I later learned were dentist mirrors and very economical. I was even more privileged because from this point on, as a fellow Southerner and a student of architectural history, Paul took an interest in my own career, encouraging me to travel as much as I could while I could, and sometimes sending me postcards from his own travels. In the years that followed, I occasionally attended social events at his then much enlarged Beekman Place residence. These included 4th of July gatherings to watch the fireworks over the river, or such an evening as when Michael Black, who is with us today, who I saw again last evening for the first time in about 40 years or more, arrived with a copper pipe prototype for the apartment's lucite and chrome lounge chairs. When visiting New York, sometimes I would meet Paul for lunch. Once he joined my partner Nick and myself for a brunch prepared by Nick's sister in her apartment in an 1880s walk-up at 14th Street and 7th Avenue, thus proving that even a devoted modernist can survive lace curtains. For me, and I've been told it was not always so for others, seeing Paul was always very jolly, and we shared lots of laughs, and sometimes liberal portions of scotch. In the early 1990s, Paul invited me and my library colleague, Christina Carboni, to visit his new offices still under construction in his building at 246 East 58th Street. I brought along the drafts of 2 calendars there, and this drawing was on prominent display. And if you look at the very top, you'll see some of the damage it got from being on prominent display, this great perspective rendering of the Concourse project for Singapore. I brought along the drafts of 2 calendars featuring architectural and engineering drawings. These were intended to promote the Center for Architecture, Design, and Engineering that I had proposed as a pilot project at the Library of Congress beginning in 1991, and in which Paul took a keen and lasting interest. In particular, he was impressed by the drawings of B. Henry Latrobe and was both amazed and distressed that they had never been brought to his attention. This was one of his favorites, this presentation drawing of Latrobe for the south wing of the Capitol by Latrobe as an answer to the question of the president as to the propriety of a Doric colonnade. So good. At this point, I had known Paul for approximately 20 years, yet for the first time that I can recall, during this visit, Paul brought up the subject of the future of his own architectural archive. He inquired if he should consider the Library of Congress as a candidate. I said, of course, but that he should also consider Harvard and Yale. Did you hear that, Bob? and visit all 3 institutions to examine their collections and facilities and to meet their staffs. The first opportunity for Paul to visit the Library of Congress for these purposes came in April 1993. The library organized a black tie dinner in its Great Hall of the newly restored Thomas Jefferson Building to celebrate the 250th birthday of President Jefferson. Because of Jefferson's passion for architecture, Jim Billington, the then librarian of Congress, asked me to invite 3 prominent architects to this event. I chose my old friend Phyllis Lambert, Paul Rudolph, and Bart Prince, quite an eclectic group. As might be expected, once again, we all had a grand time. At the end of the evening, Paul was able to go through the library's exhibition, Rome Reborn, with over 200 treasures from the Vatican Library, among which were original architectural drawings by Francesco Borromini and Gian Lorenzo Bernini, including the latter's alternative design for his world-renowned colonnade framing St. Peter's Square. Early in the day, Paul had visited the Prints and Photographs Division, where I gave him a tour of the facilities and collections, which included his first chance to see Latrobe's drawings in person. We also visited the library's preservation office, where paper conservators explained to him the complexity of conserving and housing the marvelous collection of Frank Lloyd Wright drawings donated by Donald Walker. And this drawing in particular was a total basket case. It was rolled up. You can still see creases in some places on it, and there was a whole missing area up in that right corner, left corner. And so, it's, one of the miracles of our paper conservation office. Well, Latrobe, Frank Lloyd Wright, Bernini, and Borromini must have had some effect, because sometime after this visit, Paul's longtime attorney, John Newhouse, called to invite me to visit his office, Newhouse's office in New York. He informed me that Paul had asked him to make arrangements to bequeath his archive to the Library of Congress, together with an endowment to support a center for architecture, design, and engineering. Oh, happy day. This was to begin with the gift of his drawings for 4 projects. And someone asked me last night, when I mentioned the 4 projects, how did he choose them? There was never any discussion, but you might find it interesting. The projects Paul chose to first represent himself in the library were the Yale Art and Architecture Building, not unsurprisingly, the Orange County Courthouse, the Bass House in Fort Worth, Texas, and the Bond Center in Hong Kong. This original plan was complicated by the onset of Paul's final illness, with the result that it became urgent to secure the entire archive by means of its transfer to the library in 2 parts. The first part from a warehouse in a bad section of one of the boroughs of New York. The second part from Paul's Beekman Place residence. Recently, a vehicle had driven all the way through a masonry wall of that warehouse, barely missing the shelving where the archive was stored. Most of the materials in Paul's apartment were located in the upper level drafting room, which had serious problems of water infiltration. The materials in the warehouse were packed and shipped to the library in June of 1997, and then were estimated at 10,000 drawings, 35,000 manuscript materials, and 5,000 photographic prints, transparencies, and negatives. The materials in Paul's Beekman Place apartment, building and apartment, because there were things in the basement too, proved far more difficult to pack and ship. Brett, who you met first this morning, was part of our detail. It was Brett and myself, and he will recall that this was accomplished over an exhausting summer week working with the Eagle Company. Brett and I shared a small, remarkably inexpensive and unair-conditioned apartment a few blocks away in John Mead Howell's Panhellenic building of 1928, then quite a bit down on its luck and renamed the Beekman Tower Hotel. After a long day of packing, late each evening, we would drag ourselves there and collapse. The shipment arrived on August 20th, 1997, and was estimated to contain 20,000 drawings, 30,000 photographs, prints, transparencies, and negatives. In the first year, and here it is as it arrived in Landover, Maryland. The first years the materials were stored in imperfect conditions, as you can see, at the library's facility in Landover, Maryland. Fortunately, my age and physical condition then still allowed me to climb like Tarzan on the scaffolding that supported the thousands of rolls of drawings to retrieve them for researchers like Joe King and Christopher Doman, then working on their book on Paul's Florida work and helping the library better to identify commissions and drawings. Today, there you see how the tubes of drawings were first stored. The next stage was to sort them out by the names on them, and some of them had 5 different names and 5 different shipping and filing systems. There you see it getting better, and here you see them being rehoused, and here you see the complicated, these are the instructions to the staff about how to accomplish all this and keep the order. Then we got cold storage at Landover, and so now their materials are being rehoused and they're in proper humidity cold storage. The same thing with the manuscript materials. This is what they look like when you open them up. These are the conservators and going through them to rehouse them, and this is what they look like after. Then neatly stored in boxes, and look at the length of that corridor to get a sense of the scale of this. Back to the beginning there. So, When Paul and I had first discussed his archive, I had estimated that, because of the scale and condition of the materials it contained, at least 25 years would be required to put it in order. He didn't blink. Amazingly, that is almost exactly where we find ourselves today, comfortably prepared now to let the process of digitizing the archive to proceed in earnest. This centenary symposium, organized by the Rudolph Foundation with the library with the purpose of assisting that digitization effort, thus could not be more timely. Instead of the original estimate of a total of 30,000 drawings, we have inventoried 150,000, representing over 300 architectural projects or commissions. They are housed in over 2,000 pea-sized containers on metal shelving and in over 350 archival folders and map case drawers. Over 20,000 slides and film negatives and transparencies are kept in humidity-controlled cold storage, from which their delivery can be staged in and out to prevent damage. Over 10,000 photographs and 35,000 manuscript materials are stored in over 1,000 manuscript boxes. In terms of the current service of these materials, and now, Landover was a rented building, and I said imperfect, and I mean imperfect. Then we had built a coal vault inside that building to put these things in. Well, these images are of Fort Meade, Maryland, where we have our own campus, off the grid, completely secure, and designed from the start to the specifications of our conservation office. Again, you see the scale of it. And it's modular, with different modules for different materials coming off a central spine, each one with different humidity and temperature controls depending upon the type of material in that. And then it's very easy to stage things in and out. These are materials, murals. So you can see the size of some of the drawings when you open up the rolls. And Greg Marcangelo serving them to a reader in the Prints and Photographs division. In terms of the current service of these materials, my honorable successor, Mari Nakahara, tells me that during the last 7 months, she has received over 70 inquiries from researchers, the general public, property owners, students, scholars, and curators in history, architecture, engineering, and people working on construction techniques. As a result, she has served over 15,000 drawings. Wait a second, correct me again. Yeah, 15,000 drawings in 225 containers and 172 other containers for manuscript materials, slides, correspondence, clippings, photographs, and other miscellaneous materials. So that's a premature clap. Thank you for your attention to this brief overview, because I want you to join me also for a round of applause for all the staff of the Prints and Photographs Division and what it has accomplished, especially Helena Zinkum, who couldn't be with us, Brett Carnell, Greg Marcangelo, and Mari, and many others, and also for the many researchers, architects, and historians who also have been an integral part of this process and of immense help in helping to properly identify and to organize the archive, especially Tim Rowan, Joe King, and Chris Doman. At this point, I'm going to ask Mari, who is the curator of the Rudolph Archive and the principal point person for inquiries concerning it, to join me at the podium to help field any questions which you may have, and so you get to see who she is and recognize it. Could you come up here, Mari? So, applause for the whole group. Questions? Come on, Mara. Any questions? Yes. We have about 3 or 4 models, right?
Yeah, we have 2 large models, and then so far I found 3 small models. One of them is in the Thomas Jefferson Building in an agile case display currently, but there is no project name on it. I thought that's partial resident model for the Romex, but it's written as a possibly. And we seem to have a kind of facade model for the modulator, but nothing, no project name is written. And the huge model is one for Singapore. Yes. So the reason why we do not collect the model is that we are the depository library. We will be holding these materials, which once we acquired over, 1,000 years, whatever. We do not have a model conservator in-house. That's the part of the reason we are not going to collect any three-dimensional materials, with some exceptions. So Paul's archive came over. If you come down at 3:45 today for the P&P tour, we actually have a Paul's furniture in it. But technically, we are not going to collect. So answering to your question, yes, but a little bit, small scale. I mean, scale-wise and small number of the materials.
What we have been doing with archives like that is we're collaborating with the National Building Museum, where if we take the archive, they take the models. That's what we did with the archive of the American Institute of Architects.
Right.
Because we don't have the expertise.
You may want to actually repeat that. You may want to repeat that question because we are not using.
So how do we second question was how we prioritize what we digitize, and the first one was, is it ongoing? Yeah.
Yes, it has been ongoing, and I don't say prioritize. As for Paul Rudolph, that it comes from, first of all, there are some segments. First of all, if the researcher comes and they would like to have a digital copy, that goes through our reproduction purchase, reproduction process. So the patron pays, and we will definitely digitize them and make it public. And Paul's materials are public domain. So besides some of the photographs, photographer may have rights, but if the Paul Rudolph photographs taken by him or his drawings, everything is public domain. So we'll make it every high resolution and a PPOC, prints and photographs online catalog. So it seems like a little bit unfair, but person A helps person B helps person C. So that's the way how we do it. So this is one of the ways. Second one, we from time to time have a loan from other institutions for the exhibit. That time that we will scan everything going out, just in case, before the things going out, we will scan everything. And those materials also going to be online catalog, so you will see it. Third one, we will sometimes do the display or agile case display we are doing now. That's also the part of the digitization project. So we will scan everything before we put into the display so that people can see the original as well as the digital components afterwards from home. Some other occasion is that we select the significant drawings, or when we send to the conservation and the conservation division repair them, we will put into the scan queue, and that is probably from now is my responsibility to select and just put in front and then prioritize what will be scanned. And then also I have been monitoring the researcher questions. Somehow that I get so many same questions, same project. I want to see this, I want to see. Okay, if the 5 people contact me within 3 months, the people would like to see those, I may consider put those projects rather than other projects in the front line to digitize them because of the needs.
So the question is, what is the process for the general public to access the collection?
Best answer would be contact me. You have my email address backside of your brochure, mnac@loc.gov. I would say inventory is currently in-house only, but I have a depth of the inventory that Greg created for us, and it's really detail-oriented and useful inventory to me. So once I get the inquiry, that please do not tell me that I want to come tomorrow, because as you saw, everything is off-site. I will usually ask the people at least give me 1 to 2 weeks advance notice because I have to process it. We have to confirm that everything is here. And when I saw general idea how many sheets of the drawings or container, manuscript materials in one container, I will give you, you need to stay at least 2 to 3 days in Washington, D.C. to look through them. So, so that you don't waste the money for the accommodation to stay in Washington and very high, cost. So contact me and project name. Please include all the details what you are seeking for. For instance, we have drawings, we have manuscript materials, we have some other materials. What you are looking for is important to me to get some estimate of the time. So that's the way. Just do not tell me, do you have this? I can just say yes, no, but I would like to give you as much information that I can provide. So
I'm sorry we can't deal with all your questions now, but Mari and Brett and I are all available during the day and when we're around. So, feel free to approach us about that. And then Sean, we may have a time later in the program where we will have opportunity for more questions. So thank you all very much for your time and attention.
Next, we have Tim Rowan, an academic who has advanced the new scholarship about Paul Rudolph. Tim Rowan is the author of The Architecture of Paul Rudolph, published by Yale Press in 2014, the first scholarly monograph about the architect. The book is based upon research carried out for his dissertation completed at Harvard University in 2001, as well as research work under the Klug Fellowship conducted at the Rudolph Archive at the Library of Congress, which he helped organize. Rowan is a professor in the Department of the History of Art and Architecture at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where he teaches architectural history and directs its MA program. Further using materials from the Rudolph Archive, Rowan has curated the exhibition Model City, Buildings and Projects by Paul Rudolph for Yale and New Haven in 2008. The exhibition accompanied the renovation of Rudolph's masterwork, the Yale Art and Architecture Building, rededicated as Rudolph Hall. In coordination with that event, Rowan also organized a symposium at Yale about Rudolph, the first scholarly one about the architect. The Yale School of Architecture published papers from the symposium in the recent volume, Reassessing Rudolph, that Yale Press put out last year. To show how Rudolph's architecture can be preserved, Rowan helped develop a conservation plan for Rudolph's Jewett Art Center at Wellesley College, funded by the Getty Foundation's Keeping It Modern program. Rowan has written other articles about Rudolph and various aspects of post-war architecture for publications such as the Journal of Architectural Historians, Casabella, and Art in America. His new book about Manhattan residential interiors from 1965 to 1985 concerns many different architects, but returns him to the Rudolph Archive to research examples designed by Paul Rudolph. Please welcome Tim Rowan.
Thanks for that warm introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the archive, the Rudolph Archive, and my work in the Rudolph Archive. And sitting here, seeing so many of these people who I've known for over 20 years, I realize that this is somewhat an exercise in nostalgia and the passing in time. That seems unavoidable whenever you have contact with any archive, that these thoughts come through your mind. So I'm Tim Rowan, and I've been working on the Rudolph Archive, I think for over 20 years, beginning in the summer of beginning actually as far back as November 1996, when I started a dissertation about Paul Rudolph when I was a graduate student at Harvard. I went to see Rudolph in the fall of 1996, and he was very welcoming. He said, yes, come and look at my papers. And so I started looking at the papers in fall of 1996, and I looked at them through the summer of 1997 when he passed away. And I was there very close to the time when he did pass away. And so I think what my talk today is about as a user of the archive, and I want to point out to you also opportunities to use the archive as well. And I also want to kind of chart the growth of the archive and the changes in the archive in this talk. I'm mostly going to show photographs. This is my first slide, really. Reflections on the Rudolph Archive. I'm going to show a series of photographs that I took myself, snapshots of the archive, and these are not the officially digitized objects in the archive. So you'll see my hands, you'll see my fingers holding things down. My fingerprints are on the archive. And I just wanted to talk a little bit, too, about the magnitude of the archive. Ford has given us, I'm stunned by the dimensions of it. It was far larger than I ever knew, because when I was working on it years ago, we didn't really know what the numbers were. We just knew it was vast. And now it's been nailed down. But if you look at the website for the prints and photographs collection, you'll see that it indicates about 740 documents in the archive. This number is a little bit inaccurate. It's maybe about 730, but there's far more than that. And I looked through all of these images in preparation for this talk today, and I thought about them, and I realized that most of the documents that have been digitized and are archived were ones that were published, because they had to be digitized. So they're all the images from my book, and they're from a number of other publications. And what really drives the digitization is research. And so we have to encourage more research to get more things digitized, I think. And that's the basis of it. And I'm also struck by, I have to involve myself, implicate myself. I don't want to take credit. But the way things were cataloged actually involved very often what was chosen for publication almost rather randomly. And these images and documents have kind of surfaced to the top of the archive. So this one that you see on the screen right here at the very top, this photograph of Paul Rudolph. I remember I was in Beekman Place in the archive, and it was vast and open, and I was there for months by myself. And this photograph is uncredited. We don't know who the photographer is, and I've never been able to figure out where it was published. And it was sitting on top of a box or something, and Rudolph had put it on a little board, and I pulled it. And then I used it in an article I wrote shortly afterwards. And since then, it's been used a lot, and it's become a kind of iconic image for Rudolph. Here is the actual photograph, and that's my snapshot of it. And the other photographs at the very beginning of this digital archive, I noticed they're all from articles. The way they're cataloged, I can tell by the acquisition numbers, they're all from articles I was writing in the early 2000s. And that's the order, almost. It's the order of the research that is driving a lot of the cataloging. So this is fascinating to me, and I'm implicated once again. I don't want to take credit for it. But to talk more about my involvement with it and the way that the archive, but more importantly, how the archive grew, I was there when it was with Rudolph, when it was first in his Beekman Place. I saw it completely wide open. It was an incredible experience for a graduate student to see an archive in the state. It permitted browsing, random associations. It was really like a delve into not actually the mind of Rudolph, but the output of that mind and the production. And you were able to make all sorts of associations through browsing. And it was really very fascinating. I returned, so I was there actually, I remember when Brent and Ford were there, and when they were removing the archive, and I was around, and I was also struck by Ford's remarks about how I've been in the archive in so many different fluctuations of temperature. From the extraordinary heat of Beekman Place in the summer of 1997, so hot, to the glacial coolness of some of these warehouse spaces in the middle of another summer. And it changes greatly. I returned again. I was with Chris Doman and Joe King when they went through the archive in the warehouse down in D.C. for the Florida Houses book, and I came back on several other campaigns funded by a Kluge grant, which funded my research. And the results of these campaigns, I'll show myself in a younger, buffer moment, was the finding of really marvelous, wonderful things that we brought out of the archive. We actually scanned and digitized, and that were used for the exhibition at Yale, which was put together, which I organized in conjunction with the rededication and restoration of Yale Art and Architecture's Paul Rudolph Hall, and this was done with the great support of Robert A.M. Stern, who's here today, and his counseling and help. And we found amazing things, such as this drawing. These campaigns funded by the Kluge grant helped with my book, The Architecture of Paul Rudolph, which grew out of my dissertation, and then more recently, growing out of this conference that was at Yale back in 2008, 2009, in conjunction with the exhibition. There's a book, Reassessing Rudolph, by 11 different authors who have all worked on Rudolph as well. And so this is kind of spreading, spread of scholarship, networking, associations, and this is what the archive creates as well. Another photo of Greg Marcangelo, who's here today, and with another of these gigantic drawings of the Temple Street parking garage. And Greg was really heroic in his efforts and his assistance in assisting me. We became great friends, and he really knows the archive, and it was really a great privilege to work with him. Again, for me, it was an amazing experience to sit there in a meeting with Greg and Helena Zinkum, I think, and we decided on the prefix together, I remember, for the call number for the drawings. It's PMR, Paul Marvin Rudolph. And I remember deciding and helping make that decision there. It was absolutely amazing. So we unearthed all these amazing drawings, and it was really like archaeology, and expeditions through the archive are always compared to archaeology, and that's truly what it was, because you see the tubes in the background. And the thing about the tubes from Rudolph's office, the way they came to the library, is that you never knew what was going to be in them. Never, because though they were labeled with one project, Rudolph's office reused tubes and did not label them accurately. They also rolled drawings inside other drawings. And still today, and this is why the archive must be used by researchers, this is the only way it truly gets cataloged, you don't know what you're going to find. It is an archaeology, an expedition. And we opened folder after folder, and the archive, the office of Paul Rudolph was about many different things. It was about building, it was about construction, it was about thought. It was also about media and the production of drawings. One could get the impression from investigating the archive, from looking at the archive, that Rudolph's office actually, that their main activity was producing drawings instead of buildings. It seems that way, and media about drawings. Here's a folder that I've opened. I just took this snapshot, and you see, a famous rendering of the perspective section of Paul Rudolph's Yale Art and Architecture building, virtually a calling card for him as well. But you also see the negative in the foreground that maybe produced the reproduction of this, the Kronar negative. And so the archive is the Rudolph archive tells a fascinating story about media, reproduction, architectural publishing in the 20th century. It is not just about Rudolph. It is about many, many other subjects, including this very important one, dissemination of architecture. And we see this process. Here's Rudolph's U.S. Embassy in Amman, Jordan, and there's the Kronar negative, a term virtually forgotten, and there's the drawing, the print produced from it. And it's interesting to see these drawings that are so well known, not as we see them printed, but in the negative, and all sorts of things surface as we look at them, I think, and keep studying them. And Rudolph studied them, and he reproduced them. He would reproduce them and draw over them. You get an indication about how the archive, about his own drawings, were continually used by him again and again as he thought things through. He seemed to almost chew on these drawings. And so we see the Kronar negative here, and then we see from 1970, I just took this snapshot one day, it's the perspective section. It's from a series of drawings where he's trying to trace movement and actually emotion using colored magic markers and pencils, coursing through this structure. And this all comes out of his thinking about architecture as an emotional experience. And drawings like this have come to surface recently because some scholars are very interested in Rudolph's drawings, of the redrawings of the Barcelona Pavilion plan. You may know those. But there are many others that are fascinating, such as his drawings of the Pantheon. And these always interested me. I thought that he was very interested in historical architecture. And all sorts of familiar things from the Rudolph archive take on different dimensions, take on different qualities, familiar things like concrete and concrete block. As Rudolph redrew them, like this example of this block with the raised surfaces, which has a peculiarly lighthearted quality to it, though it's very heavy, drawn in this turquoise marker. And the drawings have many different qualities and dimensions, and they are not just by Rudolph. This is from a series of drawings of the Boston Government Service Center, and these were mostly presentation drawings. These were shown, I think, during the presentation of the project, along with an enormous model in Boston around 1961, 62. And they're all in graphite, they're all in pencil, and they're very soft, as opposed to Rudolph's usual hard-edged pen, which we're so familiar with. And this drawing, I know, and I remember learning about this. This was by Rudolph's office, and there was a delineator, a young Japanese man who worked on this. And this is a magnificent, gigantic set of drawings, sadly torn, that needs to be pieced together and restored. It is comparable to Mises' Friedrichstrasse drawings for the Friedrichstrasse skyscraper. It has those qualities to it. And we go on, and there's big drawings, and there's small drawings, and there's just sketches on trace, thousands of pieces of trace, so light, like fallen leaves, like onion skin, hard to examine, hard to peel apart. They're fascinating. You go on, but it's not just these presentation drawings or the drawings on trace. There's all sorts of, this was a place producing buildings, producing interiors, and so there's all sorts of working drawings, mechanical drawings, studies, and things like that. This is just the lighting plan for the Gardner Coles apartment. And this was an amazing document. This indicates all the dimmers and things in this apartment. Here's the dimmer schedule. What an enormous number of dimmers. And think of the expense in the late 60s of putting this together and trying to explain this to a client. This is why Rudolph got fired off this project. And light being used to change emotions here. And so many tantalizing things about these working drawings, the sketches. I mean, they're not all in Rudolph's hand again, but what's written on them. Velvet versus steel. He's going to cloak this room in velvet and has a steel undercarriage, a steel structure. And that really says something about Rudolph's whole approach to architecture, both the soft and the hard. And the hard seems like the soft, and the soft seems like the hard. Very metaphorical. And then this brings us to actual interiors and structures. This is the Kaiser apartment. I found these slides in the archive, and they're professionally taken. I have never found where they were published. And so the only record of this long demolished apartment that was in the UN Plaza is in the archive. And this is really, these are the strange material qualities of Rudolph's architecture, that the ceiling and the walls are covered with these reflective curtains, and there's lucite furniture. And so this is an architect that you associate with the solid and the heavy, the monumental, and yet everything seems to dissolve here in this apartment in the UN Plaza. Andy Warhol visited it. He talked about it in his diaries. He was amazed and terrified by it. And we go on. The archive records, today the archive is recording, the Rudolph Archive at the Library of Congress is recording more than just Rudolph's residue, his production. It's recording changes in what has happened to his buildings. And I was very struck by this, and this is really a call for preservation, that all these photographs taken by Todd Bryant of the decay and destruction of the Mickles house in 2007, a house by Paul Rudolph tragically demolished in around 2007, are all recorded in the archive. And so this records this later state of structures. And I was thinking today that the program for today, I hope that it joins the archive as well. So all these things keep being added to it. And then a final image to think about. This was just a snapshot, my snapshot of a snapshot that I found. And there's all sorts of things in the archive that emerge. Stray snapshots. There used to be old matchboxes, candy wrappers, dust, the residue of use, and photographs like this. And they're fascinating to look at, to watch, to contemplate, to think about, to mull over, and then to use. And we must use them. To me, I was looking at this. This is a model of the concourse, and you saw a wonderful drawing that Ford showed earlier of the concourse in Singapore, and I actually know the delineator, it's Larry Scarpa, but here's a great model of it. And so there were models, but where are the models? They're not all in the archive, because the archive is linked to other places and other resources. Some of these models are in Asia. And they're still around. They're in Singapore, they're in Jakarta. But I was looking at this in preparation for this, and I thought, in a way, to me, it almost looks like a big birthday cake. So this is a nice way of saying happy birthday to Paul Rudolph, I think. But the final message, and that we'll talk more about all this, is that we almost use the archive in order to get it cataloged, and that we are all participants in the archive, and that we all ultimately become part of the Paul Rudolph archive, I think. Thank you. Oh, questions, yes. And maybe answers. Mm-hmm. Yes.
This is a layperson's question, but what was the purpose of the enormous roll drawings?
What was the questions? What was the purpose of the enormous roll drawings? They were presentation drawings. They were shown to clients. They were shown to redevelopment authorities to impress them. They were shown to rivals to overwhelm them. With sheer scale and size and dimensions. They were produced for exhibitions, and there were more exhibitions of Rudolph's work than we remember, but they are recorded in the archive, and he liked enormous scale for these presentations, for these exhibitions. Mm-hmm. We'll take this question down here. Do I see an evolution? Yes. Was there an evolution in Rudolph's graphic design? Yes, definitely. Changes. Oh, changes in, well, you can chart all sorts of things through the archive, and this needs a lot more study, and it's very interesting. It needs to be related to the work of other architects. The rise and development I've written about of the perspective section in his work to convey the complexity, the increasing complexity of the buildings because the plan was not adequate. That's one thing. And then the use of color, from primarily ink to magic marker, colored pencil, to trace all sorts of things, and there's more. Mm-hmm. I know. I know. Yeah. Yeah. You should buy this book called Reassessing Rudolph. Funded by Robert A. and Stan. Funded by the Yale School of Architecture and Robert A. And I've written an essay about the perspective section and its dissemination and in Rudolph. But there's more to be done on that, I think, clearly. Another question, this gentleman with the beard, yes. Oh, yeah, I was just there, too. Yeah. The realm plan, yes. I think it's an approach to planning and it's an approach to space which Rudolph shared. Did Rudolph really know about autoflows when in the 50s and 60s? Probably not. Not very much would have been known, but Kurt Forster can address that a little bit later, I think, as well. I think it's a similarity, a design approach, a spatial approach. I think Rudolph's spatial approaches come mostly out of Frank Lloyd Wright, actually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the next important step. Maybe it can start today. Yeah, I think the delineators are very important, and while they're still alive and can be interviewed, and I think that's a great project that can be undertaken by the Rudolph Foundation, Library of Congress, yes. Another question. One more, that's it. Very good. Thank you so much.